at town meeting. We're very fortunate that we have this incredible opportunity to participate in making decisions about our towns. And we want everyone to feel comfortable showing up and speaking up at town meetings. So we will have this be recorded, so it'll be available on Facebook and YouTube after this. And we'll be sending around a link to that as well as other resources after the meeting. So with that, I'll just turn over to Alisa Magnotta, CEO of Housing Assistance.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everybody and thank our speakers. I'm so grateful to see so many people, because all of us together is how we're going to make change in our communities. And you know, it's funny, I was thinking about this. I moved to the Cape about 19 years ago this time of year, and I had no clue about town meeting or how to participate in town meeting. It is a very New England, you know, form of government and ritual. So now that I'm in housing, right, I better understand the importance of town government and everyone being involved. And I better understand the importance of providing a seat for everybody in the community so that they can speak up on issues that are important to all of us. So today we're going to learn how to navigate that process. Last year, CCYP did an event, a mock town meeting, much like this. And I thought it was such a cool event. I thought it was so great that they actually gave like the hands-on experience, not just learning like what to say, but actually practicing it. So I reached out to Lauren and asked her if she wanted to join forces on this. And, you know, we're both organizations are figuring out ways to dismantle the current policies that are in place so that we have housing available, year-round housing specifically available for all of us who live and work here. So it was a natural fit to work together. And I'm so grateful to have our local experts here who have lots of years of experience presenting at town meetings or policy boards or select boards. Of many select board members are here. So again, thanks for everybody for coming out, and thanks Lauren for saying yes. It's your turn.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alisa. Thanks so much to the HAC staff and to all of our speakers for this evening. CCYP feels very similarly to HAC in that this was a natural partnership. Of course, we have a very heavy focus as an organization on civic engagement, especially at the local level, and feel really strongly as an organization that there's really no better way to affect positive change in your community and to become engaged than to get involved in local decision-making processes like town meeting. Similar to Alisa, I'm a transplant to the Cape, and town meeting was really foreign to me. I'm grateful to Dan Horgan and to David Vieira and Falmouth Bay actually last year as we put this program together, the mock portion of it for tonight were great in educating me. It gave me a crash course and, you know, all the things involved with participating in and getting involved with town meeting and town government. So grateful to them and especially to Dan for coming back to lead our meeting tonight, our mock portion. Really, CCYP initiated town meeting education after seeing through our surveying some evidence of this intimidation factor that existed, not just among young people, but I think among residents in general on the Cape. A feeling that they wouldn't even walk in the door because they didn't think they knew enough to be there in person, to vote, to speak at the microphone. And so we wanted to overcome that intimidation factor by providing some really base level education on things that many people take for granted. Common definitions, key players in town meeting. Those are some of the things that we'll be going over this evening. Things that you may be afraid to ask, but probably many other people don't know them either, and they're afraid to ask too. So we're gonna work on this together and overcome all of that together, and hope that we can get people to the microphone, get people in the door, and get them participating in this local process that's so key to the future of our communities on the Cape. So with that, I'm gonna take us into our town meeting 101. We have a pretty tight agenda this evening. Thank you very much for launching the PowerPoint. And we're going to start out with just an overview of what we'll go over this evening, our session agenda. So we are going to have basically a review of some basics related to town meeting. We'll talk about, as I said, key definitions, key players, and then we will turn it over to Dan Horgan, former moderator for the town of Yarmouth, who will be leading our mock town meeting portion of the event, during which our participants can actually speak up as they would during a typical town meeting, voice concerns, opinions about the mock articles that we've proposed for this evening. We have 2 articles on the table on the mock warrant for this evening. And after that, we'll adjourn the meeting and have some time for Q&A with some of our panelists and speakers that are participating tonight. So why town meeting? Town meeting is one of the purest, if not the purest form of democratic governance that you can find in the United States today. It dates back over 300 years, so a big, rich history here in New England of participating, and many other local governments on the Cape, use a variety of forms of town meeting, as well as other types of town governance and structures. So, for example, Barnstable does not have town meetings. So that's an important note. If you're a resident of Barnstable, then this will not apply to you as directly, but they do have a town council. In other parts of the country, we have a council manager or a mayor council form of government. Here on the Cape, primarily, we have what's called the open town meeting format, with the exception of, I believe, just Falmouth has a closed town meeting, which means their residents elect representatives to then come in and vote and participate in town meeting to represent the electorate or the residents. So through town meeting, this is why it's important. This process sets the salaries and the budget for the town and town officials and staff. You also have the opportunity as voters to vote on local statutes or bylaws that actually set the plan and the roadmap for your community. So there are all variations of things that end up on a town meeting warrant or agenda for the year, and we'll go into some of that here in a second. But really the key takeaway is that the role of you, the citizen, is really, really key, and this process does not work without you showing up and getting involved, which is why we're here tonight to tell you all about it. So the town meeting, the formal definition, and just a quick note that a lot of this information was adapted from a really great resource that you can find online through the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website. It's called the Guide to Town Meeting, or the Citizen's Guide to Town Meetings. And that document has just a wealth of information. All of this basic info that we're going over is available there and more. So I encourage everyone to check that out if you want additional information. So the town meeting is a gathering of the town's eligible voters, and it refers to that event itself, the town meeting. But we can also talk about the entity of town meeting. And as I mentioned before, this is a direct democratic form of governance. So the warrant is basically the agenda for the town meeting. It outlines when town meeting is going to happen, where it's going to happen, and all of the agenda items that will be covered. Those agenda items are called articles. And then the motions are the actions that can be taken by a member of town meeting to initiate discussion or take an action. And there's all different caveats and things that we won't get into when it comes to motions. There is a document called Town Meeting Time that the moderators actually use to get into a lot of those specifics, but we won't cover those in full detail. This is the 101 tonight. So annual versus special town meeting is an important note, because what you'll see this fall is actually a mix of both. We have a really unique situation with the pandemic where a lot of the annual town meetings, which would normally take place in the spring, have been postponed to fall. But then we also have the special town meeting, which is an additional meeting that can be held if there are specific articles or issues that need to be tackled that weren't covered in the annual meeting. So some towns have postponed their annual meeting this year to the fall. Others held their meeting in June to meet the deadline that was set by the state, and it was pushed back in light of the pandemic and the challenges associated with that. And then some towns are holding both an annual and a special town meeting. So we encourage you to check out, and there will be information shared after this event that's a compilation of towns on the Cape and when their meetings will be, and if it's an annual or a special meeting. Next slide, please. Oh, back one, actually. Okay, key people, very important. So we have the selectmen or select women, sometimes called as a body, the board of selectmen or the select board. This is a group of people that is often put in charge of selecting and supervising the top town position, staff position, so the town administrator or town manager. And these individuals are elected. So they're elected officials that represent you. They are very involved in the town meeting process and often vote on the articles to indicate their favor or disfavor for whatever is on the table for the evening or day when those articles are being heard. You have the moderator, which we have Dan Horgan, the former moderator of Yarmouth, who will be acting in that role this evening. And this individual runs the town meeting. They basically set the parameters for how long people have to speak, call on people when they want to speak, and they declare the outcome of the votes either by voice or by electronic voting, which some towns have now. And they are also elected officials. We have the town council. That is the attorney or the lawyer that works for the town, either as a contractor or an employee of the town. The town clerk is the elections official for each town. And then we have the finance committee, who is overseeing the budget prior to the annual town meeting. And they also typically vote on many of the articles, and that is printed in the warrant many times, how many voted in favor or not in favor. Okay, next, please. So I mentioned some caveats with the moderator and also with different precedents for each town. Every town has a different way that they run town meeting. If you go to one town, it might look different than another. It will likely look different than another. Sometimes these procedures are written down, but sometimes they're just a precedent that's been set over the years, and the electorate and the moderator know what to do. So it can be really challenging to navigate sometimes as a newcomer. So it's important that you know that your moderator, your select board, your town staff, they're there to answer your questions if you have them, and you should reach out if you're confused. Also, fellow citizens can be helpful with that if they've been around for a while and can tell you how things work. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but you have representative, also known as limited or closed town meeting. That's Falmouth's form of town meeting, where you vote in representatives to represent the voters of the town. And then most of the towns on the Cape have open town meeting, where all voters, all registered voters can show up in person and vote, or virtually in some cases, and vote on matters related to the town's future for the upcoming year. Sometimes the form depends on the population size. So you have an option basically as you get into higher population sizes. Next slide, please. So this is really important. And when it comes to engagement, you as a voter have some opportunities to get involved. You can place an article on the warrant. So you can actually dictate what that agenda looks like for your town. You have to often get a certain number of signatures. I believe this is state required. So you need a minimum number of signatures, but for annual town meetings, it's not very many, 10 signatures for a warrant article, and special town meetings require 100. So if you have an issue that's important to you that you want to see voted on and enacted, you have the power to do that as a voter. That has to be completed. There's often deadlines that are communicated, and you have to watch your town's website or call the town clerk to find out when those are. Any registered voter for the town can speak. So you can stand up and speak at the microphone. Again, some of the circumstances of this are a little bit different this year during the pandemic, so we encourage you to check out what your specific town has put in place. And then you can vote. Again, every town is different. Some are a voice vote where you say yay or nay. Others, you raise your hand, it's a show of hands, and they count how many hands are up. Others, you have to stand up. And then you also have secret ballots where if it's a very sensitive issue and people may not want their neighbors to know how they're voting, you could make it a secret vote. And then you have electronic devices, and some towns now more and more are adopting this, which is an excellent way to ensure accuracy and to make sure that people feel comfortable voting what they really want to vote for and don't feel discouraged from standing up or putting their hands up because they don't want people to know what they're voting. So there are many sensitive issues that, you know, some people will change their vote based on that. Next slide, please. So for today, and actually for most town meetings, these are some ground rules. If you wish to speak, you wait for the moderator to acknowledge you. Today, obviously on a Zoom call, we're not going to be standing up, but you wait for the moderator to acknowledge you. And in a typical town meeting, you would state your name and your address. You keep on topic. Don't talk about tangential things. You stay on target with what's being discussed and what that particular article is. And you address the moderator directly. I think we've all, if you've attended a town meeting, you may have seen, hopefully not too often, where sometimes people can get into tit for tats. Most moderators will not allow that and will nip it in the bud as it starts, to not attack the speaker themselves, but you could take down their argument, but not them as a person, and definitely address the moderator directly to avoid the back and forth that can happen sometimes in really heated issues. So for tonight, we have two mock warrant articles that we're going to be addressing. The first article is to amend the general bylaw to allow for Village Center Development District. And the second is to fund expansion of the sewer system to Murky Pond Trail Road area. And just a quick note about these mock warrant articles, they were selected based on real warrant article language that's been used in towns on the Cape at previous town meetings. And the reason why we selected these specific ones is because they're related to village center zoning and septic or sewer wastewater issues, both of which can directly impact opportunities for housing development, which both we at CCYP know and HAC knows, and so many of us know by now, is such a key issue on the Cape to the future sustainability of our region and ensuring that people can live here year round. So that's why we've selected these two, and they're very similar to what you might see on an actual town warrant. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Horgan, our former town moderator for Yarmouth and a pro at running town meetings. Thank you so much, Dan, for moving us forward and for coming back to do this with us again under these totally different circumstances than when we last held the mock town meeting last spring at the summit. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lauren. It's truly my pleasure to be here. My name is Dan Horgan. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's mock town meeting, and I just want to welcome all of you to the meeting and encourage you, if you have any questions, to talk to us when we have the Q&A later on. Usually when I start a town meeting, I begin, much like Lauren did, by giving some of the background information of how things can be done at a town meeting. And then like her, I also introduce some of the key players. A lot of people, first time they come to a town meeting, they don't really know who's who. And, you know, I usually try to point out the selectmen and the finance committee. Oftentimes at a town meeting, you're gonna find all the important committees that are formed in the town and deal with different issues in the town. They're all gonna be sitting in certain sections. So I try to point them out. Why? So that if you have any questions about what's going on or any particular article that's going to be dealt with at town meeting, you can actually go over and talk to somebody who's in the know on that particular article before it actually even gets on the floor. So we go through a process of introductions. Sometimes I invite people to come and I love to invite young people to come and sing or recognize somebody in particular, because town meeting is a great opportunity to showcase somebody who's done really something important or noteworthy in the town. It's really one of the few occasions where many of the townspeople get together, and it's a great occasion to highlight somebody who served the town in a particular way. And then we get down to the business of the meeting, which is called the warrant. And the warrant consists of many different items called articles that are going to be discussed that night. And oftentimes you'll find that the meeting will go a second night and possibly even a third night. So we'll do that now. We're going to start with Article 1. And is there somebody that's going to move Article 1 on the floor?
I'll move that we take Article 1 and put it on the floor for discussion.
Okay, now the article has been moved, and now there's something else that needs to happen at a town meeting. Anybody know what that is? It needs to be seconded. Sometimes an article can be so outrageous and upset people so much that you will not even find one person in the audience who will second it. It's called an eloquent silence. And I actually saw that happen a couple of years ago. But normally the article is moved and seconded. And then that's the opportunity that I look over to my left and I say, Board of Selectmen, you people have been looking at this article for a while now. You've been discussing it. What is your position on it? And they'll either say we recommend or we don't recommend. They don't talk right then, they just give the recommendation. Then I look over at the Finance Committee on my other side. Now the Finance Committee, they deal with financial issues, but they also make recommendations on many other kinds of articles because they have an understanding about how financial or how articles might have a financial impact on the town. So they've talked about the article well before the meeting as well, and they will have a recommendation. After the article is moved and seconded, I've got my recommendations. I go to the mover of the article and I say, Mr. Freeman, what is this article? Would you like to explain it for us?
Sure. The article itself says specifically to see if the town will vote to adopt the zoning bylaw to create a village center development district that enables infill development and redevelopment to increase housing while keeping with existing historical character.
Okay.
Shall I go on with support, or do you want to say more?
No, I think that's the opportunity for the person who actually moved the article to kind of give you a general explanation about it. Then the moderator usually gives the mover an opportunity, and usually if they're moving the article, they're in support of the article. So I'm going to recognize Peter now and ask you, why should town meeting vote yes on this?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, my name is Peter Freeman. I live at 10 Paradise Road, and I am speaking on behalf of this bylaw, also with the support of many business interests in town, although I'm speaking for myself. I am in favor. What this article will do, and I should note that it was drafted in part with the Cape Cod Commission, who wrote a model bylaw, so we thank, at least I thank them for their help. And it relates to infill development and increasing opportunities for more attractive and historically sensitive development, keeping the character of the town, and will allow housing to expand and village retail and all of that. So what it really does, the guidebook that the commission had written years ago is called Designing the Future to Honor the Past. And that's really what this will encourage. It will encourage our village centers to be developed in keeping with their historical patterns and scale. And while allowing, perhaps in some cases, greater density, remember it's infill, it's going to be consistent with the area, and it will, by enhancing the historical village character, we believe that it will be much more attractive aesthetically, and it will therefore help attract shoppers and visitors and tourists. And that's why it's a huge plus for our lodging and restaurant owners, tourism, and also the housing that I mentioned. And if you think of various towns, Main Street in Falmouth, or Main Street Hyannis, or Route 6A, Main Streets in Barnstable Village and Yarmouthport, those buildings close to the street and sometimes almost touching each other, they wouldn't be allowed under current zoning. We would require larger front yards and side yards, and it's not historically accurate. And there are other smart growth attributes of what this article will accomplish. The other zoning is much less attractive. And so what this bylaw will do is to basically relax these dimensional requirements. But please note, and this is one of the reasons I'm in favor, although it will allow the infill development and more accurate or historically accurate and sensitive character, it will not replace other bylaws. It won't change the use that the zoning bylaws currently allow. It won't change any septic requirements, be they of the town or of Title V, our state code. It will not replace the historical requirements, although that's the goal, to make the new development, infill development, consistent with the history of the past of the areas. But it will not replace a historic district jurisdiction or other bylaws that may relate to historic or aesthetic matters. And also, importantly, any other bylaws it will still be subject to. And there will be site plan review. So therefore, in wrapping up, this bylaw, to me, and I hope to all of you, is a win-win. It will help our economy and businesses, but it will certainly, truly, we believe, be designing our future to honor our past. So vote yes on Article 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Just a couple quick notes. Zoning is usually very difficult to understand, and it gets very complicated sometimes. There's a lot of questions that people have about zoning because it affects how you can use your property. So it's always a good idea to try to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about when they're talking about zoning. Now Peter has moved the article and he's given his explanation. And this is the opportunity now where the people in the audience, the voters, get a chance to either talk for the article or against the article. So I open the floor to people who wish to speak to Article 1. Are there any people who'd like to speak? Any questions?
Mr. Moderator, I would like to speak to Article 1.
I recognize Sarah Cole.
My name is Sarah. I also live in the town at 123 Fake Street. I'm in Precinct 4. I am very, very much against Article 1. It will bring ungodly amounts of traffic to my neighborhood. The cars will just be going by right and left all night, 24 hours a day, and the noise will just bring so much pollution with all of that cars that are there, and they're gonna be parking everywhere. There's just not gonna be any parking for all these people who are coming to this new development. So they're just gonna leave their cars on the street, and that's just going to bring down the character, the historical character of my neighborhood. My neighborhood has existed in exactly the same way that it has for the last 100 years, and nothing about my neighborhood should ever change. I want it to remain that way forever. And the moment we start bringing in people to come in and just to redevelop, it's just gonna bring the drugs. The drugs and the alcohol and the nip bottles and everything is just gonna be everywhere. And the trash, our dumps are going to be overloaded by all of the additional trash that is brought into my neighborhood because of the redevelopment of that would be associated with this article. So overall, I can't support this whatsoever. We need to keep Cape Cod exactly the same as it is now, and it has been for the last 100 years. And this is not the way for us to go. We have to you can't vote for this. Please just do not vote for this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. So now you see we've had two different sides of the article. So if you walked into the meeting and you didn't even know what was on the warrant, you've already learned an awful lot about how this particular article is going to affect people, both pro and con. So even if you didn't know or don't know what's going to happen at town meeting, go anyway and listen. Bring an open mind and learn about how these articles will affect not only you, but the people who live in your town. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this article? Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, I'm going to move the article. Now, this is the opportunity where people actually get a chance to vote. In my town, I usually have people raise their hand and say aye or nay. So all people who are in favor of Article 1, raise your hand and say aye.
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 All people who are against Article 1, raise your hand and say nay.
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 Okay. Now, as a moderator, I get to make the call. That's one of the jobs of the moderator, is to decide how the vote came out. And I'm going to say that the article passed by the requisite majority. Good
Point of order, Mr. Moderator, point
Yes,
of order.
sir. Mr. Forrest.
My point of order is this. This is a zoning bylaw. Doesn't it require a 2/3 vote in order to pass, Mr. Moderator?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. Zoning, because it is so important to people's use of their property, has a specific number that has to be reached in order to pass the town meeting. A regular article only has to pass by a majority, 51%. One vote extra and the article can pass. But with zoning, it has to be a 2/3 vote. And so in this case here, we found that the numbers actually were quite close. I made the call. In my town, I have the authority to make the call that it reached the 2/3 majority vote. However, the great thing is, if you disagree with me, you can challenge it. You can stand up and say, Mr. Moderator, point of order, I challenge your decision. And if you can get 7 people to agree with you, we are going to go out into the audience and count people one by one. Now, a lot of people don't like that because it takes time, but that's the nature of town meeting and the importance of your vote. So it's an opportunity. If you don't like the way the moderator came out on the decision, you have that power to force him to go out and count and prove to everybody in the audience that the number of people reached that 2/3 that was necessary. I have people raise their hands so that it's visually apparent to people whether or not the article passed or not. If it's just voice, sometimes people can get their voices really up there and it's difficult to decide. But if you look around, you see how many hands, it's a lot easier to find out that 2/3 of the people passed. So yes, Mr. Forrest, thank you very much for that point. I did determine that it passed by the requisite 2/3 majority, and that will bring us now to Article 2. And who's moving Article 2 for us?
That would be me, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Quinn, I recognize you for Article 2.
I move to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $250,000 to fund the conceptual design and planning for sewer expansion in the area along Murky Pond Trail Road.
Okay, the article has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, the article's been moved and seconded. Again, I look to the Board of Selectmen if they recommend. I look to the Finance Committee to see if they recommend. And then I look to Mr. Quinn and say, okay, Mr. Quinn, why is this article on town meeting floor? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And again, my name is David Quinn. I live on 75 Buttercup Lane here in town. And I'm here to ask you to approve the $250,000 to fund the conceptual design and planning for sewer expansion in the area along Murky Pond Trail Road. I'm in favor of this proposal to expand our sewer system because it would have great environmental benefits and it would also allow for the development of much needed additional housing in our neighborhood. For years, Murky Pond has suffered from algae blooms and pollution from septic systems in the neighborhood. This pond was once an excellent trout fishing location, but now it's completely choked out with weeds all summer long. A sewer system in the neighborhood would allow wastewater to be treated at a centralized location instead of entering the groundwater through septic systems and ultimately polluting the pond. In addition, the expansion of a sewer system would allow for much needed housing in the neighborhood. Without such a system, it's tough to build more than a single family home on any parcel in this area. This issue is really important to me personally because there's so little housing available in town. Rental prices are really becoming outrageous, and I fear that without more housing options, I might have to leave Cape Cod permanently in search of a place that's more affordable to live. So I hope that you all support this proposal. I think it's a no-brainer. It's good for the environment and it's good for year-round housing. So please, let's make Murky Pond clear again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Article 2 is now on the floor. What that means is that this article now belongs to the voters. It can't be withdrawn. It's yours now to make a decision. So is there anybody that would like to come to a microphone and speak either in favor or against Article 2? I'm going to recognize Chris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Chris Kazarian. I'm a resident at 12 Murky Pond Trail Road. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I decided to come as a direct abutter to the site where this project is being proposed. As a direct abutter, I never received proper notice about tonight's discussion. I had to learn about this meeting from my neighbor, Carl. This meeting wasn't properly posted, and I will be submitting an open meeting law complaint with the Attorney General's office. I'm a fifth generation resident of this town. I've lived here all my life, and my great grandfather was the first town constable of this town. And if he were here today, he'd be ashamed at the way this town is doing business. I do think several of our town officials should recuse themselves from any discussion tonight and moving forward, as there's a clear conflict of interest. I think several of them are trying to make a quick buck off of our taxpayers' back. As far as this proposed project, it will forever change the character of this town that I grew up in, and that my father and my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather grew up in. By adding a sewer expansion in a location that's not fit for sewer expansion, you will be encouraging sprawl, development, and turn our community into an urban city, something like Boston, New Bedford, Worcester, and we're a small community, and you're changing that character. I'd also like the board and the town here tonight to consider less costly alternatives like composting toilets, aquaculture, which are just as effective as removing nitrogen without the cost overruns, headaches, and the lawsuits that this project is going to lead to.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? Anybody else have any questions? Anybody for or against Article 2?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Forrest.
Point of order. It's getting late. I noticed that a number of people have left the meeting, and I question the quorum.
Okay. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the rules of town meeting, some towns have a rule that means that requires a certain number of the voters to be present in order for the meeting to be valid. It's called a quorum, and it's contained in the town's bylaws. And some towns have done away with this and have no quorum. Yarmouth is one of them. Why did they do that? Because they were having difficulty actually getting town meeting off the ground, because in the last 10, 15 years, fewer and fewer people are coming to town meeting. And so having a quorum of 200 or 250 people can actually be difficult sometimes to achieve. Also, when you get to the end of a town meeting, you'll find that, after somebody's articles have been dealt with, oftentimes they'll go home. And so the numbers continue to dwindle as the meeting goes on. So it's a great point of order, but Mr. Forrest, I'm going to remind you that this particular meeting is governed by Yarmouth's rules, and Yarmouth doesn't have a quorum requirement. So we're well within the parameters of going forward, but I thank you for your interest in your comment. Anybody else? Any questions, any comments on Article 2? Some important points have been made on both sides. Yep, go ahead, Mr. Fields.
How you doing? My name is Michael Fields from 123 Make Believe Lane. I'd like to speak in favor of the Article 2. I think it's important that we invest in the community, and that's what it sounds like we're doing. We're trying to benefit the community by setting a positive precedent, cleaning up the environment and bringing much needed year-round housing I think we all can agree are top of the list priorities. So by being really productive, more productive with the land, by using it to make more houses and being environmentally conscious, I think that addresses several issues that is very important here on Cape Cod. I do have a question in terms of how the $250,000 would be raised, or what will we be taken away from for that?
Okay, Mr. Fields, that's a great question. Normally at this point, I try as a moderator, I try to stay neutral. And so I'll identify somebody either on the stage, a select person. Oftentimes you're going to have your town manager sitting up there with you also, and he's a good source of information. But I will recognize either the town manager or one of the staff people to give you that particular information that you're looking for. The fact that you asked the question is not singular to you. If you have that question, I guarantee you that there's at least 20 or 30 other people in the audience that are also thinking the same thing. It's very intimidating to get up to a microphone and speak. And so it's always, always appreciated when people go to a microphone and ask questions because it informs everybody. As well as that, town meeting is oftentimes televised because there's an awful lot of people that can't get to town meeting for one reason or another, but they're watching at home. And town meeting is always held before the votes. So the $250,000 that you're talking about will be on the ballot that you vote on at the next election. And so town meeting serves as an education tool because not only the people in the audience, but the people at home want to know how this money is going to be utilized and how it's going to affect their tax rate. So it's a great question. And so I would recognize somebody to get you that information. It gives the information to everybody. So everybody now can vote with a more informed idea of what they're talking about. So is there anybody else? Anybody else with any questions? Seeing none, I'm going to move Article 2 now. All those in favor of Article 2, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand and say nay.
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 Okay, article fails. And when an article fails, that means that that particular action, that expenditure, that money cannot take place. And so it may still be on the ballot when you go to the polls at election day, but it will have no effect because town meeting is the authority that gives the town the ability to spend that money for that particular item. So you can see how important your vote is. You have approved one article and you have disapproved another one. And it doesn't matter whether the Board of Selectmen or the Finance Committee were for them or against them. You, the people in the audience, have the final say. You, the voters, have the final say. So I'm going to close this particular section of the Zoom meeting.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Freeman.
I move to reconsider and reduce the amount of the article to $200,000.
Okay. For those of you who
second
have
that
not
motion.
been, yes,
I second that motion, Mr. Moderator.
thank you. All right, we have a motion to reconsider. The idea of reconsideration usually is governed by different rules in every town, but it's an opportunity, usually after a little bit of time has elapsed, for the audience to reconsider their position. Maybe they've come into some new information. Maybe they've recognized that they've made a mistake. It's an opportunity to redo it. So Mr. Freeman is making that motion. It's been seconded. Now I give the audience and the voters the opportunity to decide whether or not the article gets reconsidered. So I put the vote to you. There's a motion on the floor to reconsider Article 2. Is there all those in favor of reconsidering Article 2, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those are opposed, raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Okay, I determined that it does not pass, and we'll move on now to Article 3. And for tonight's purposes, we'll stop here. But thank you very much for this opportunity to show you a little bit of the mechanics of town meeting.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was really good. Thanks everybody for participating. I learned some stuff. That was that was good. So we have a few minutes now at the end. If anybody has some questions, so Dan is available for questions. Mark Forrest, who is chair of the select board in Yarmouth, and we have, and a former HAC board chair as well. So very knowledgeable about housing issues. And we have Peter Freeman, who frequently he's an attorney, and he frequently is representing housing development projects before zoning boards and that sort of thing. So anyone on the call is welcome to ask any questions of them. How close was this to town, to what town meeting really is like, and any other questions. You guys can just raise your hand if you'd like to ask something.
I have a question.
Great.
For the people involved in town government on this call, what would you say is the your biggest obstacle or the biggest challenge relative to your role at town meeting, and what's the thing you think needs to be fixed the most?
I'll let Alisa go first. Mark, you're muted.
Yeah, let me take a shot at that. I think the biggest challenge is getting participation. I think a lot of the towns are experimenting with ways to get to make it more attractive, make it more convenient for people to participate. Some towns, they experiment with childcare. Others are very vested in food. I've always believed that food is a big draw. Our problem in Yarmouth is that we haven't been able to find a good food vendor to take that on. But I've seen that work in other communities. Brewster has a sort of a corporate, when I was the town administrator in Brewster for a year, there was a corporate vendor that sponsored food, and they put out a very nice spread, which was very well noted and appreciated. But that's the challenge, is getting people to participate and to make it also easy to understand. That's why doing this forum tonight is great. Having forums like this are important in terms of helping make it easier for people to understand how it all works. So getting people there is important.
I'll just echo what Mark is saying and add that while I was moderator, it was my hardest task trying to get people to come to town meeting. I encouraged the schools to send their young people so that they could see how town meeting worked. I partnered with the young professionals to help educate them a little bit about town meeting. We moved our town meeting around a lot to try to find a better time. The bottom line is that life is just so busy now, and it's difficult. You've got two parents working. It's difficult to get people to make the commitment to come to town meeting. I don't think they appreciate the extent and the extent of how town meeting affects them personally. I see parents go to a soccer game every weekend, and I asked them, why didn't you come to town meeting? Because we just voted on your school budget, and that's going to affect the quality of your teachers, the quality of the programs that they offer. And there's just so much that happens at town meeting, the quality of the libraries, police, and you need to remind people that to take their voice back and to actually come and not be intimidated. Town meeting is their opportunity to speak to their neighbors and particularly to their elected officials, and disagree with them or agree with them, but it's their opportunity to take back their voice and to learn how to use it. I think town meeting is one of those environments that teaches us how to become leaders ourselves. And so it's incumbent on all of us really to invite and to continue encouraging people to come to town meeting and learn more about it, because our leadership base will grow.
Excellent question.
Any other questions for our experienced town meeting participants?
Hi, Michael Fields. You may have addressed this earlier. I was a little late to the meeting, so my apologies. So if we're interested in attending town meeting, where would I find out that information, and how would I go about doing that? What's the best way to do that?
So you can, oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, it's easy to, generally most towns have pretty accessible websites where that information is usually prominently displayed. But if that's not the case, there are some towns that don't have websites that are user-friendly. Call your town clerk's office and ask them when the next town meeting is. It's real quick. Town clerks we're blessed with a great group of town clerks on Cape Cod, and give them a call. They'll tell you, they'll give you all the details.
Fantastic. And would they be able to give me like the agenda and all those things that
If the warrant and the articles has been developed, yeah, they should be able to give you some idea or give you a copy of the warrant.
Okay, fantastic.
Depends on how far along they are. Sometimes the warrants don't get developed until maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks before the town meeting. So, but clearly the dates are generally known a month or 2 ahead of time. And feel free to give your town clerk's office a call, and they'll let you know. They'll even tell you if one is being contemplated. It's important to understand that for many towns on the Cape, fall town meetings have been a sort of a ritual for many communities in terms of doing their planning articles. Some communities do their capital budget in the fall because their free cash gets certified. I want to go back to something that Dan Horgan had mentioned, is that sometimes this town meeting business of town government can be complicated, but the reality is that the governing body for every municipality, or just about every municipality with the exception of Barnstable on Cape Cod, town meeting is the governing body. It is an opportunity for you to participate in the governing decisions of the town. The governing body is not the Board of Selectmen. The governing body is town meeting and town meeting rules. And many people don't participate, in part because they might feel uncomfortable or it might feel a little bit bewildering. We've all been through that experience. Everybody has had their first town meeting where it was all very foreign, very alien. But after a while, you can get warmed up to it pretty quickly. And the only thing that I would also add is don't be bashful about speaking. What I would recommend is just write down a few items, keep it brief. And, you just need to mention your name, your address, your precinct, and then write down your question so that when you get to the mic, when the moderator calls on you and recognizes you to speak, you're not, you don't freeze up, and just write it down and let it all out, and you should be fine.
And I just wanted to note that Lauren put in the chat a link to on CCYP's website. So they do compile the town meeting schedules. So you can go on there and, they try to keep that up to date. But like Mark was saying, it doesn't happen on the same day every year. So you have to check the website, and you have to, find out when they're going to have their town meetings, and, what's going to be on the warrant develops, pretty close to the time of the town meeting. And this year, of course, the town meeting dates have been a little unpredictable.
I noticed that in the notes, I'm sorry, Shawna.
No, go ahead.
I noticed in the notes that somebody has a comment about how difficult it can be to get to town meeting for some people. And of course, it's difficult in this day and age for all of us to set aside time. I think that the important thing is to recognize that these votes are going to happen whether you're there or not. And the quality of your life and those around you is going to be affected whether you are there or not. So it's really bodes well for all of us to carve out that small piece of time and be present, or watch it on television if you can't be present. I'm hopeful that in the future, we're going to be using more and more of this kind of technology where people can participate from home, ask questions, and get answers without the difficulty of leaving home or leaving children, or just having got in from a third job. So yes, it is difficult, but it's only once or twice a year. And it's critical that your voice be heard at town meeting and your vote. Even if you're not comfortable getting up, your vote means something and can be the difference between an article passing or not. We see that constantly across the United States, where elections are so close that they have to either be recounted or that somebody won by a very, very small margin. The exact same thing happens in town meeting. But if the decisions are made, whether you're there or not, and so it's really in everyone's best interest to show up, listen to the articles, and then voice with your vote how you feel your town should go forward.
Shawna, can I just make one final point? Your annual town meeting is set by either your charter or a bylaw. So you will know, you can find out when your next annual town meeting is in your town. The town clerk's office can tell you that because they're set literally, it's either the third Monday, the fourth Thursday, or whatever. So that's generally known. You can plot out the annual town meeting based on what the requirement is for your town. It's set in the bylaw, it's set in the charter. So call the town clerk's office at least to get your information on when your next annual town meeting is.
Right, you might have to track it for special. Peter?
Just a quick question, Dan. Speaking of the close margins of votes sometimes, so did you count the mail-in ballots when you determined how the votes went? Or maybe they weren't delivered on time?
Well, that's the thing is we don't use ballot votes at town meeting. It's just a voice count. The final thing I wanted to say is that even if you do not want to speak at a town meeting, but you take the time and you go, you learn so much about people in your community. You learn and get to hear people who are extremely articulate and can speak to articles in a knowing way and help educate you. And you also get to hear an awful lot of funny things happen at town meeting. The most articulate people show up, and sometimes the most cranky and ornery people show up at town meeting. And you get both, and they both have a right to speak at town meeting, and the moderator will recognize them both. And it's just the best show in town for the money.
Thank you.
Yes, Lauren.
Lauren, do you have your hand up?
Just one comment, to Dan's point about participating and how integral that is. I would also say that if you are finding it especially difficult to get to town meeting, to participate, to understand the process, really consider reaching out to your town clerk or your town manager or town administrator. I think that you'll find many of them are extremely receptive to hearing from you and hearing your concerns. And in fact, it is their job to ensure that these processes are accessible to the majority of voters. And so if you are having a challenge getting there, and maybe your town's having a challenge reaching quorum, you're probably not the only one that's having that challenge. So I would encourage people to reach out and open a dialogue, have a thoughtful discussion, and maybe provide some suggestions if there are ways that would make it more accessible for you. And I think we're seeing now what's possible with these virtual meeting formats, as well as some of the things that were already happening prior to the pandemic, with the willingness of towns to be flexible with the date, with the time, with providing childcare, with providing food. I think there's a real willingness on the part of, I would say, most of the towns, if not all of them, to provide a way for everyone to, as much as possible, participate and be a part of it. So please be part of that conversation if this is something that appeals to you and you see the value of it, and there is a tremendous value to it.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that was, I'm mindful of the time, we're at 7:03, and I think that was a great note for, to end on. We'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered. So it'll be the recording of this session. It'll be some additional resources like links to the CCYP town meeting website and, understanding warrants and all that kind of thing. And it will also include a link to fill out your census, because that is another important way to participate in local government. We still have till the end of the month to finish your census. So, and that's one thing that we're pushing out, because, it's important for all of our funding and things that come through our political representation too. That's another way that we can make sure that everyone is standing up, being counted, and, we're getting the representation and the funding that we need. So I really want to thank all of our volunteers. Don't be mad at our cranky homeowners. They were great volunteers. Thank you for doing that. I think everyone who has experience has recognized something in what they said. That's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to get at town meetings. And thank you so much, Dan and Lauren, for the structure of all of this. It was a great program. So unless anyone else has anything urgent, I'm going to wrap this up. Jody, do you have No, you're good. Okay, I see her. Jody's the one who's in charge of recording the whole thing and making sure that we have this available to people in the future. So thank you everybody for joining, and
Thank you,
stay tuned
everyone.
for your follow-up email.
Thanks.
Thank
Good night.
you.
everybody.
Good night.